Cleaning and sanitizing procedures, we want to reiterate, as well as employee practices in terms of food safety, they've already been in place, and so they should be maintained. And they are great for keeping our food safe and from reducing the risk. And that's why we think also why there's not a big risk in terms of one of the reasons why there's not a big risk in terms of virus being on our foods is because the food processing industry understands that cleaning and sanitizing is so important. So let's just keep those things up. You might have to increase your frequency for shared equipment, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And absolutely, because we are living in a very uncertain time where we might have new employees. Those employees that we've had for years are a little bit frazzled, understandably. And we're working through all of these new, our new. Increased surveillance and auditing is absolutely recommended to make sure that we are complying, even with our original food safety protocols, but then also as well as our increased protocols in terms of reducing the viral spread. Next slide. So here I want to really talk about the difference between sanitizing and disinfecting. Sanitizing is what we do in a food setting most of the time. And that's where we are reducing the bacterial contamination after cleaning. And by definition, that reduction is a 5-log reduction or a 99.999% reduction in bacteria. So again, the key here is that you're not seeing viruses there. It is bacterial. While some of sanitizing will remove viruses, we are definitely, if there is, disinfecting might be necessary to remove the virus. But again, the reason why cleaning and sanitizing is determined to be adequate is because we are cleaning. We have a cleaning step where we are scrubbing with a detergent and rinsing, and then utilizing a sanitizer afterwards as part of the application. So in conjunction with cleaning and sanitizing, that is very sufficient for our food processing equipment and food contact surfaces. However, there might be, we are going to get into a new term here of disinfecting. And this is against bacteria, fungi, as well as viruses. It's not necessarily going to be active against bacterial spores, but there are some things, some disinfectants that are, not all though. Next slide. And you can see here where sanitizers and disinfectants, as you can see, a disinfectant has a 6-log, or as you can see, 99.9999%. It is a higher reduction than most of the sanitizing reductions that we achieve. Again, we'll talk a little bit about the differences between a sanitizer and a disinfectant. There are going to be times where the same chemical can be used as a sanitizer and a disinfectant. One of the things, though, that I do want to emphasize, and I will continue to emphasize through this, is that your disinfectants that we're going to recommend, or EPA has recommended, CDC has recommended, some of those are not approved for food contact surfaces. So it's going to be important to understand that you're going to clean and sanitize your food contact surfaces, and you may be disinfecting other commonly used areas, but they may not be something that you can use in both situations, both scenarios. Next. So let's talk a little bit about expanded cleaning. Here, you're going to be cleaning and disinfecting to protect your employees and your customers from viral spread. This is not a situation where you're actually trying to protect your customers from viruses getting on the food. Again, cleaning and sanitizing protocol that you already have in place is adequate for that. This is expanded to protect your employees and customers. So we're going to be focusing on commonly used equipment and tools, And we do have, again, in your resource list, there is a list of commonly used equipment that just give you an idea of things that could be considered commonly used, but things that folks are constantly touching, like computer screens and phones and certain temperature probes, those kind of things. When you are disinfecting or adding a disinfectant to your company, please understand that you want to make sure that you're making them available, but you are labeling them. It's really important. We are going to have a lot of secondary containers of disinfectants around the facilities, and they need to be labeled. We want to make sure that we don't mistake something and cause an issue when it comes to chemical hazards because of misuse or not knowing what was in the container. Also, you want to have written detailed cleaning and disinfectant procedures. It's not necessarily enough to just put a 70% alcohol spray bottle out. Let them know what you expect them to do with that disinfectant. Okay, next. In terms of disinfecting, it is extremely important to understand that if something is highly visibly dirty, that there's soil on it, just like in cleaning and sanitizing, if it's dirty, it cannot be effectively disinfected as well. So it is important that you clean something before disinfecting commonly used equipment. So if you have something that has, it's a touch screen that has a lot of dirt or some sort of food particles on it, clean it first, wipe it down first, and then disinfect it. It's also, so think about disinfecting high touch points like your door handles, your payment stations, your touch screens, shared pens. I recommend you each have your own pens, but shared pens, shared utensils, and also focus on restrooms, changing rooms, break areas, lunch rooms. Next. When it comes to choosing your cleaning and sanitizer, there are absolutely lists, and we have given you lists in your resources. EPA has registered sanitizing products, as well as there's now an EPA registered disinfectant for SARS-CoV-2 list, and that is called List N. And you will find I think 10 pages of disinfectants that are effective against SARS-CoV-2. Again, please understand that some of the disinfectants that you might choose to disinfect some of the common work areas or cash registers, for instance, or payment areas will not be the same sanitizers or same things that you can use in your food manufacturing area. Next. So let's just give you an example here. So FDA stipulates that chlorine sanitizers cannot exceed 200 parts per million chlorine for a sanitizer and for food product contact surface. So that's for a food product contact surface. However, CDC and EPA have stipulated that for a disinfectant for this virus, 1,000 parts per million chlorine is what you should be using for disinfection. So if you choose chlorine as a disinfectant on some of those commonly used areas that are not product contact surfaces, the 1,000 parts per million is fine, but you don't want to have those spray bottles of chlorine of 1,000 parts per million floating into your food processing area, because if these were sprayed on your food product contact surface, you would have to follow it up by a rinse or a cleaning and sanitizing again. Because you're in danger of, if you use that contact surface immediately, you're in danger of a chemical hazard. I want to emphasize that. So 1,000 parts per million is 5 tablespoons to 1 gallon of water. You're going to get about 1,000 parts per million. Again, that is unscented, regular, not concentrated bleach. Next slide. So What happens if someone does report that they are ill and you suspect coronavirus illness? What do you do in that area? Well, this is what CDC is recommending. You close off that area. Uh, what they're saying is evacuation of the facility is not necessary. However, there are times where evacuating the entire facility might be necessary because you have a small area. It might be one room, and that individual uh, was definitely exposed in that area. Had exposure in that area for a certain amount of time, longer than an hour, for instance. Uh, you might then have to evacuate the entire facility such that you can do some disinfection, cleaning and disinfection. Um, the CDC is recommending ventilating 24 hours. I know that's not practical for some, and so it's as long as practical. Again, it's really just kind of bringing that air in and evacuating the stale air and getting uh, uh, air changes so the virus is less likely to be in there. You want to clean and disinfect the area. Think about all the things that the ill person has used. Focus on frequently touched surfaces, and we do, again, have the CDC guidelines. You want to make sure that everybody's wearing disposable gloves when they're cleaning and are wearing proper PPE. It's important to make sure that you have know what PPE is, personal protection equipment is needed for each of these chemicals that you might be bringing on for disinfection. After you're done, dispose of those gowns and gloves, then wash hands, and then make sure if you are using a disinfectant that is not approved for food contact surfaces, cleaning and sanitizing afterwards of that surface might be necessary. Next, please. It's really important here to ensure that you're training your employees on these new cleaning and sanitizers, cleaners, and disinfectants. You might be bringing some things on. Obviously, alcohol is flammable. If you have a lot of alcohol in your plant, you have a flammability issue. So making sure that they have the proper PPE and understand the hazards to that chemical are really important. 1,000 parts per million bleach is a little bit more corrosive than what we're used to in terms of a sanitizer. Understanding all of these things and training your individual, the folks who work with this stuff, is really important. Next. So let's just quickly get into expanding practices in terms of packaging, storage, and delivery. Again, we don't think that this virus remains viable on surfaces for an extended period of time. We do think that delivery conditions and times will likely reduce that risk. And we don't think that packaging is likely a high risk for transmission. But it is important that you educate your customers. If they feel more comfortable, you can definitely tell them to say, we've done everything we can do to produce this food such that it is safe for you. We've put it in a container. We've protected it from anyone recontaminating it once it's been in that container. But if you feel comfortable in bringing it home and you want to take it out of the outer bag and discard the outer bag and give them a little bit of a procedure that helps them feel more comfortable about getting takeouts or groceries. I think that's something that's perfectly acceptable, and we can help you with some of those things. Continue normal cleaning and sanitizing protocols when it comes to your packaging areas, and limit those people that are in those packaging areas so you don't have a high risk of spreading the virus from person to person. And you might want to also think about limit person-to-person contact for delivery. Next. In terms of policy, you might want to think about your interactions of your delivery people, your truckers. Consider partitioning areas between your shipments, your shipping areas, and other areas of your facility. Definitely provide those truckers hand sanitizers and hand washing facilities. I have been in some facilities where they don't even allow truckers and delivery people to use the washing facilities, and right now that's probably you might want to think about allowing them to use those facilities so they can wash their hands and then also use hand sanitizers that you give them. Um, Delivery personnel, absolutely practice social distancing. You might want to think about having them use face coverings. Encourage online payments so they don't have to have that personal interaction with the customer. Uh, Absolutely put a policy together for disinfecting delivery vehicles. Steering wheels is one of those commonly used areas that you want to focus on disinfecting. But you want to make sure that you're ensuring the compatibility and safety of that disinfectant for your delivery vehicle. Obviously, bleach might not be something you want to use in a vehicle. You got to also understand that the individual who's in there is in a closed vehicle, so you want to make sure that you're not using something that with high fumes, yeah. So you want to think about the safety of that individual. Make sure that you're providing wipes, paper towels, and disinfectant to your delivery person so they can disinfect in between deliveries. And definitely hand sanitizer between deliveries is okay, but we are recommending that these delivery people come back periodically and wash their hands. It's important to also let these folks know, like Rob was talking about, keeping your hands away from your face. It's a difficult thing to do, but it is going to be important here for your delivery personnel to ensure that they reduce the risk of virus spread. Go ahead. Last and not least, but not least, record keeping, something near and dear to my heart. Uh, I will tell you, we know that already the FDA is already mostly reducing their inspections to a for cause. And USDA, while they are in continuing inspections, there is definitely a policy in place that if their inspectors become absent due to illness, they will focus more on slaughter operations and reduce their inspections on fabrication, meat uh, product production. So you might not see your inspector. You might not see a state regulatory or a federal regulatory inspector, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to have to show that you didn't do your due diligence. So written records are going to be huge. It may be the only way to prove regulatory compliance during this time. Eventually, inspectors will be back on the job and back on their regular routines. And they absolutely will be, I promise you, will be looking at the records of this during this time. And they will be reviewed, and there will probably, most likely, be an emphasis on this time. So I understand that there's a lot of things that are being put in play and more responsibilities being put on the food producers, the food growers, but having somebody make sure that the records are in place and correct are going to be really important right now. Okay, I think it's time to look at questions again. If you guys can help me with that.
So Joelle, in the interest of time, since we have about 25 minutes left for the webinar, Laura has been doing a really great job of compiling the list of questions for us. So if we can just go ahead and move on into the next part of this with dispelling the myths, we'll get to as many questions as we can during the last part of the Q&A. And then we've had a lot of questions come in about whether we're going to make resources available afterwards and recording of the webinar. And yes, we are doing that. We'll make sure that everybody who's on the call will get an updated email with the link to the recording, as well as a compilation of the questions and answers that we're not able to answer today. So we appreciate everyone's questions, and we've also posted some additional resources already in the chat box for folks.
One of the things that we wanted to talk about is dispelling some myths. I'm going to pass this over to Rob so we can talk a little bit about that.
Okay, I hope you've found the information presented so far to be useful. I know it's a lot of stuff, and we'll certainly be able to answer some more of your questions in just a moment, and also get those resources out to you as well. But I wanted to go over just for a moment a few myths that have been floating around out there, and sort of dispel some of those for you. So I'll move through this very quickly because I know we want to get to have plenty of time for questions. So the first myth here is foods are a significant risk for transmitting SARS-CoV-2. I hope that you see now, based upon the information we provided today, that there is really no concern, no significant concern that foods are a risk for transmitting this particular virus. So that's a myth. The second myth is delivered food should be left to sit for hours after being brought into the home, or even delivered and left sitting onto on the front porch or whatever, waiting to be brought into the home. That's not true. Again, the way we're going to handle the virus, even if it's present on these packaging items, is to make sure that we use good sanitation in the home, and also for any surfaces that are touched, and also make sure that we use good hand washing and don't touch our face, because it's not going to fly from the packaging to your face. It's going to be removed there by touching the package, if that's even a possibility. It seems like it's a very remote possibility, and then touching your mouth or nose or potentially eyes. One of the issues we have is if we leave food sitting out for a very long period of time, now we're creating potentially a food safety issue. So we haven't really solved any problem on the COVID side, but we've created a food safety issue, so that becomes a disaster. Okay, so the next one is you should disinfect food packaging brought into the home. Generally, unless you're high risk category or just super concerned about it, it's best just to, when you bring those grocery bags into the home, put your groceries away, and then just discard the packaging. Either throw it away or put it into your recycle bin. The next one is takeout food is a significant source for transmitting the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Well, we are concerned about if a sick worker were to handle the food product in packaging and then hand that right to you, there might be a possibility of transferring the virus to you in that manner. But again, it's not going to fly off the package. The way we're going to control that is through good hand hygiene and surface hygiene for any surfaces that bag touches. And then we want to throw that bag away as soon as we get it home. Okay, you should wash fruits or vegetables in soap or a bleach solution. Not necessary. First of all, the concern about the virus being transmitted through fruits and vegetables is believed to be extremely low, and through washing, which is just normal running cool or up to warm water, depending on what you prefer, cool or warm water, and you're going to be able to do a good job washing the produce that way. We don't need soap. We don't need bleach. Hand dryers kill the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Not true. The actual heat from the hand dryers actually doesn't do it. We would need a tremendous amount of heat. You know, we're talking about getting up to 63 or so degrees Celsius, or around 145 degrees Fahrenheit, to do that. And if your hands get that hot, then you're going to end up having severe burns. So that's not going to work, right? So hand dryers are good to, in some cases, dry your hands, but only after you've washed them appropriately. That's the part that's going to control the virus. The next is you must use very hot water and antibacterial soap for hand washing to kill this SARS-CoV-2 virus. Not true. You want to use water that's comfortable, so you'll actually wash your hands. Very cold water, people might not wash their hands as long. Very hot water, they're not going to wash their hands as long. So the issue here is using soap, using good hand technique, and making sure that you wash your hands very effectively. It's going to be the technique and the time of washing and then proper rinsing that makes sure you get this virus away. There's no evidence that the antibacterial compounds in certain soaps are effective against viruses. Again, they're antibacterial. They're not really necessarily effective against viruses, but again, the most effective thing is just proper hand washing. So the next myth is if an employee in my facility, for example, tests positive for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, we should recall potentially affected products. The FDA has stated no, there's no reason to recall a product just because someone who was potentially infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus may have been present in the facility or even handled the product during processing. If there is a food safety breakdown, that's where you're going to recall the product. And then the last one, which is just ridiculous, but I have heard this multiple times, is I should gargle bleach to prevent infection. Clearly a horrible idea. So we certainly don't want to harm our own health in a way that's not going to provide us any protection against the infection, and also is just going to make us sick or otherwise injured. So dispelling those myths, there are probably other ones out there that we could address, but in general, these are just not the ways that we're going to be able to handle this virus.